All year, you've been trying to break your terrible habits. You've tried detoxing, fasting, even punishing yourself. But the year is nearly over, and these habits are still torturing you. It's not because of your laziness or lack of willpower, but because all our lives we've been taught to break habits the wrong way. But there's a psychological concept used by top performers that will break any bad habit with 10 times less effort. And today I'm going to show you why these traditional methods are keeping you locked at square one, and a science-based alternative that, if done right, will break your bad habits in a third of the time without feeling like you're torturing yourself. But to find out exactly how you can do that, we need to first address the common mistake that most people make. We've all fallen into a situation where we try to make a gargantuan effort, a feat of incredible willpower to try and force the bad habit out of our systems. We'll go on a diet, we'll detox, we'll do some other polar opposite of the habit that we're trying to break, and just expect it to clear on its own. But as we all know, not only is this unsustainable for the long term, but when we inevitably stop, we'll fall all the way back down to where we started. We relapse, all because we're relying on willpower. This falls short close to 100% of the time, because not only is willpower finite, like a muscle, but it completely disregards a key component of how habits actually work. If someone can't stop checking their phone when they're lonely or bored, telling them to just not do it might work for about 5 minutes, but this route fails to address that habits are based on triggers, not actions. When you experience a trigger, an event like walking in the front door from work, it triggers the habit, which could be something like scrolling social media. Habits are neurologically wired, ingrained by months or years of repeated trigger and action. It would seem that this brain phenomenon actually gets in the way and makes it harder for us to break habits. But as you'll see, it not only holds the key to killing them off for good, but it speeds so fast that you'll start to question why you haven't been using it for all this time. But for most of us, trying to brute force your way into breaking a habit through willpower is like trying to win a marathon by sprinting the thing. It's a purely short-term and inefficient solution that doesn't bring the consistency required to rewire those pathways and make real changes. But instead of suppressing our mental processes, we need to reframe and work with them to push back against these terrible habits, to finally get rid of them before the year is over. And it involves attacking the source directly, the habit loop. It's a protocol that all habits have in common, and as such form a triad of strategies in our toolkit to break these terrible habits, refined through thousands of years of human evolution. For most, these tend to work against them, and they become slaves to their impulses. But you can be different. Because with the 3 parts of the habit loop, the predictable, the irresistible, and the elusive parts, I will show you how you can finally break free of those habits that have been plaguing you for years. If a person ever even gets to this realization of breaking habits, they will immediately attempt to change the predictable component. This is actually a fatal error that negates this system's effects entirely. So instead, we'll start with the elusive component. The thing about habits is that they don't materialize out of thin air when we decide to do them. They have a specific event attached to them that causes the action. And that's where identifying this event, or the cue, is the first place to start. I named this step the elusive one for a reason, because this cue isn't always obvious. It can be something as simple as a place like your bedroom, but it could also be a time of day, a mood, or even a specific person. But identifying and blocking this cue is like blocking the pipe before the water can even rush in. Just throws a spanner in the works entirely, because if there's no cue, there is no action. And when this happens, your brain slowly starts to eliminate the habit from its system. But there's another reason this always comes first. There are situations where you can't block this cue, because it's kind of impossible to stop yourself from feeling sad or lonely. And that's where we need to move on to our next stage, the irresistible one. And this is very aptly named because when you block this stage of the pipe, your brain will stop receiving the urge to do the habit entirely, whether or not the cue is present. If we really dive into what a habit is designed to do, we stump up with one single objective: to make a desirable action for survival happen on autopilot. But the way that our brain assesses what is desirable and what is not is actually put under a lot of stress in the modern world. And the criteria that would have worked perfectly for when we were foraging for food leads to modern day social media addictions. And that criterion is the reward that the activity nets. When you do something that actively contributes to survival, the brain releases dopamine, or the feel-good reward chemical. This is the crux of every single habit, because without a reward, there is no incentive to do the action. And the brain is inherently attached to this reward, not the action. So the secret of this strategy is to identify the part of the activity that gives you the reward. For scrolling social media, that might be the lights and bright colors that stimulates your mind. If you find ways to artificially lower this reward, for instance, turning your phone to grayscale, you will, in turn, lower the incentive to keep repeating the habit. But as with the previous strategy, this isn't going to work in every situation, because there are relatively few things for which you can change the reward without replacing the action entirely. It's hard to replace alcohol with a healthier relaxation technique like meditation, because it doesn't net that instant reward that the alcohol does. But with this information in mind, we can now come back to the predictable strategy, which is to change the action. But it's not quite in the way that you'd think. In most cases, people take the willpower route. They throw everything they have at this habit in a big effort to do something different, but end up throwing their hand down when they inevitably fail, and end up walking away until that New Year's motivation strikes again. Sound familiar? Well, the avenue I'm about to show you will make sure this never happens again. It's an avenue that involves changing the activity ever so slightly in a way that you still get the reward, but in a much healthier way. There's not so much a breaking of the habit, but rather reframing it so that it will help you instead of hurting you. Let me explain. If you keep the cue the same, if you keep the reward the same, but if you change the action very slightly, your brain won't notice anything different because it's hell-bent on getting that reward. So what you want to do is to slowly progress the harmful action to a healthier alternative. If you have a soft drink problem, you could transition from sugary drinks to flavored soda water to naturally infused water and then just plain water. Or if you're a social media addict, try resetting your feed and populating it with educational and motivational content. That way, even if you do get on the app and start scrolling, you aren't met with brain rot, but rather things that will actively help and advance your life. And that's really what your goal is, isn't it? Feel like you're not wasting years of your life or putting your health at risk just for a quick hit of dopamine. So you'll see that these strategies are incredibly fluid and interchangeable, and your situation will likely need a combination of these. But if you're still searching for the discipline to stop your procrastination habit, this video right here will reveal the strategies that top performers use to outsmart procrastination that have saved me hours every week. So go click on that.